All right, T, do you want to get started?
I do, actually. So thank you. Welcome, everybody. If you're here for the presentation, Find the Parts, then you're in the right place. So this is a topic that Ashley asked me to do a while back, and we've all kind of talked about it. I don't have a microscope set up, so unfortunately, I can't bring in specimens from outdoors and show you some of these. But this was a wonderful exercise in finding some of those resources that are already out there with images online. And so you're going to see in this presentation quite a lot of photographs taken by other people, all credited. And then I summarize at the end those resources that I used because I think it'll be really great for self-study, and the number of plants that they treat is much greater than the 3 or 4 that we're going to talk about today. So my name is Tiana Rehman. I'm the Herbarium Director for the Philecology Herbarium here in Fort Worth, Texas, at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. And you're here with the Armchair Botanist Forum. All right. So let me make sure I can advance. So hopefully you're all looking at the slide of the presentation. This is our opening and housekeeping slide, and it's just a reminder that that this program is a collaboration between you and us that are working here on these projects. And this community is better because you're involved. So this is a casual conversation. I invite you all to submit questions in the chat, or if you'd like to put your hand up or unmute yourself and ask a question, as long as we're not all doing it at the same time, and hopefully we can manage that, that will make this more interesting. And I suspect you all have things to contribute because I learned a lot as I was putting this presentation together. So here's the outline of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to just take a step back and look at floral morphology, floral anatomy, basically the shapes and what the parts are in a flower. So we're going to do a little bit of kind of review of that. And then we're going to look at 3, maybe 4 species and just find the parts in those plants. I think it will be useful, and I think it will make you look at each of these species a little bit differently next time you encounter them. I will admit, these are all some spring flowers, except if we do get to the Asteraceae at the end, the sunflower family at the end, there's a fall flowering one thrown in there just for illustrative purposes. Are there any questions so far that anyone might have, or any comments? All right, super. All right, floral morphology, the forms and structures of flowers. So these few slides are taken from a presentation that many botanists here at BRIT have kind of put together, and most recently they've been modified by myself, Brooke Best, who's our Director of Texas Plant Conservation, and Jessica Lane, who is our Herbarium Collections Coordinator. And this is just one section of this course that we've taught before, but it's about describing flowers. So there are generally sort of 3 ways in which we kind of talk about flowers. The parts of the flower, and that's really what we're going to be at today, looking at whorls and the number of elements in a whorl. And then the description of flowers, the symmetry and shape. I think I talk a little bit about these when we get into some of the species we're looking at. But we're not really going to spend much time on it. I'm not going to go kind of review any of that. And then lastly, the arrangement of the flowers on the plant, the inflorescence. And again, that's another one that we're not really going to go back to review too much, but we'll still talk about it when we get to some of those species. But I think that might be the best way. So variations in each of these really helps us kind of group plants together and see patterns across families. So I do give you the family for each one of the species we're going to be talking about, and you can see how well this might align with other members of that family. And there's going to be a few caveats, but we'll talk about them when we get there. Okay, so floral terms. So I mentioned that we are going to be talking about floral anatomy, the parts. So the terms you'll hear me, there are 2 terms you'll hear me probably say quite a bit, or we should know because they're descriptive. One is whorl, or sometimes series, maybe less commonly series, it just kind of depends. And this is a circle or ring of organs. And you'll see how that plays in later. But there are 4 whorls that we talk about when we come to the flowers, to a flower. The calyx, the corolla, the androecium, and the gynoecium. So we'll get there. There are some diagrams. please ask questions. I'll do my best to point with my mouse. Hopefully that's somewhat visible. And then lastly, these whorls are described by their morosity, the number of segments in these whorls. So those are two of the ways we describe parts. And this matters because when you're trying to identify plants and you're looking up technical descriptions of these plants to see, do I have a match? Do I not? These numbers may matter, and these parts and how they're described will matter, because if the description is telling you about the corolla, but you're looking at the calyx, wait a minute. So hopefully this is helpful to everyone, but it should be a review. Okay, so here, and I have various versions of this diagram, so, or at least two versions of this diagram. So hopefully this makes sense. I think about these whorls, so I'm considering this a single individual, complete, perfect flower. And I think of these whorls sort of like nesting bowls. Or if you were looking straight down, it would look like a bullseye. The outermost whorl, and on this diagram, it's labeled the sepals. It's marked in green, and it's also represented by that green nesting bowl. Sepals are the outermost whorl of a flower. Maybe one of the best examples of this is a rose. If you think about a rose in bud, you've got that green leafy material that's kind of protecting the bud. And then you see maybe a red or pink, whatever color the petals happen to be, emerging from that. The sepals, that outermost whorl, have a protective function to protect that bud. So that's the outermost whorl. Often green, but can be different. I think in the description of this presentation, Ashley mentioned that, or I asked her to put into the abstract that an Alstroemeria flower, a Peruvian lily flower, is really useful to do these dissections or to kind of find the parts. It's a great, and there's tons of resources online that I'm afraid I didn't go back to or list, but you can email me and I'll send them to you. But does anyone have an Alstroemeria that they brought with them that wants me to talk through that a bit? If you do, you can pop it in the chat and we'll talk about it. Okay, back to our flower. We're talking about the outermost whorl, and that is the sepals. Protective, protect the bud. All right. If you're looking at these nesting bowls, let's remove the green one and let's start looking at the yellow, and apologize that these colors don't correspond across the two images on the page. So the next innermost whorl inside the sepals are our petals, right? So those petals, and this is pretty much what you think of it. If we're talking back about that rose, then the petals are that red, showy, colorful, flat blade that is part of a flower. Those petals, evolutionary purpose is, right, maybe, well, for something that's insect pollinated, that's to attract pollinators. And I know you can all think of lots of examples of this, and we may talk about some of those in a bit. Okay. Then, so we've talked about the outermost whorl, which is the green bowl. We've talked about the next innermost, which is the yellow bowl, the petals, so the sepals and the petals. All right, if we remove that from your flower, you're left with two whorls. You're left with the andrecium, the stamens, the male part of the flower. That's your next whorl. And then inside that, you've got the gynecium, the innermost whorl, the very center of your bullseye if you're looking straight down at the flower. So those are our four whorls: the sepals, the petals, the stamens, and then the carpel, or the female part. And we'll talk more specifically about some of those in a second. Does anyone have questions about that so far? I know, stick with me. There's a few more diagrams that will be helpful. And if these two diagrams that we go through don't help, then we'll pop into looking at some of these parts. And this will be recorded, I believe, so that you'll have access to, and we'll post it online, so you'll have access to review it and catch me if I've misspoken, or teach me something if I said something incorrectly. Okay, different view of the same thing. Again, think about our nesting bowl. So here is a diagram of a perfect and complete flower. I'm using those two terms because they have botanical significance when we call a flower both complete and perfect. It means that the flower those two terms together mean that the flower has all four whorls, and that it definitely has the male and female parts of female whorls. You will see that terminology should you look up technical descriptions. Okay, if we're looking at this diagram of the flower, we can kind of walk through these steps again. The outermost whorl, or if you're holding a flower upside down, and I've got an example here, but you're not going to see it very easily on your camera. I don't know if you're looking at my video, but I have, and this plant isn't doing well because some of you recognize my office, which is in the herbarium, and we have to freeze all plant material before it comes in, and we don't bring in fresh material. So I sprayed this with a pyrethrin, and it's kind of wilting. Anyway, this flower I have in front of me, if I'm holding, let me take one flower off. So here's my flower. If I were to hold that flower upside down, the part closest to my pinched fingers would be the sepals. So on this diagram that you're looking at on the screen, that green part there is the sepal. There are the sepals. You will also hear the term calyx. So a calyx is composed of multiple sepals. So sepal is in the individual, the calyx is the plural. So that's your calyx. Inside that, or again, if I were to peel those sepals off of my flower, I would be left with the showy pink thing that's in my hand, and those are the petals. Just like a calyx was composed of many sepals, we have a corolla, in this case, composed of many petals. So, yep. Okay, so we've got the sepals, the petals. Inside that is where we have the andrecium. So if you're still with me and you're looking at that diagram on the screen, we're looking to the left side of that diagram where the word androecium, that means male house. So that is the collective term used to describe the male parts of a flower, the andrecium. So the andrecium may consist of multiple stamens. A stamen, I'm going to pull one out for you here. And again, you're not going to be able to see much on my screen, but I will show you photographs illustrating this in a second. The stamen consists of a filament, so sort of a little pole, and then an anther, which is on top of that pole. The pollen is stored in the anther head. This diagram is just kind of showing you a general representation. There are so many variations in the morphology or the shape of these features that I'm showing you, which is why it's often really hard to translate this diagram to what you're looking at in real life. So I was pretty excited at some of the resources I found when I was trying to pull some images together for the presentation, because I do think they'll be good study guides if this is something y'all are interested in continuing and doing. Okay, so sorry, back to that second most innermost whorl, which was the andrecium. So the male house, the andrecium, is composed of multiple stamens. So you have an anther and a filament. All right, inside that, we have the gynecium, meaning the female house. So this is where the female parts are. And on this photograph, or on this diagram you're looking at in front of you, a gynecium is composed of a pistil. Sometimes you'll also hear the word carpel or pistil, because you can have fused carpels that make up a pistil. So I know that you're all sticking with me. I see you're all still online, which means you like words as much as I do. You like plants, and this is where the two are married. So the botany, the words in the language of botany are extensive and thorough, and can be very creative. So let's go back to that. So we're at the gynecium. So we're at the female part. The female element, you may call it a pistil, and that pistil will consist of a stigma, which is identified on the diagram at the very tip. That's a sticky surface. That is where the pollen will stick to the female portion, send a pollen tube down the style, right? Down the style that you can see identified on the diagram, and then into the ovary to fertilize those ovules. Those little ovules, and those are the little kind of knobby looking things that you can see in the purple basal part, that ovary, are what, when fertilized, will produce seeds. right? So you're looking at the ovary, which will ripen into a fruit if that plant is, once that plant is fertilized. All right, are y'all still with me?
Yes, everyone's here. Kimberly said she's taking notes.
Good.
And I gotta say, I keep thinking of the botanist Guy Neeson when you say Guy Neeson.
I do. That's me too, Ashley. Guy Neeson is a botanist who worked quite a lot with the sunflower family of plants. And he always got a kick. He still gets a kick out of the fact that his name is very similar to the collective term for the female part of the plant. Because that's often, right, this is, and all that's a good point, because it takes me back to the, here in the herbarium, we accept specimens from all over, all taxa, but ideally those specimens are all reproductive. So they all have fruits or flowers, because those typically help us definitively identify the plant that we have in front of us. Doesn't mean we won't accept sterile material that does not have flowers, but it is most useful to have them with reproductive characters on them. Okay, any questions about this diagram or points somebody wants to make? Okay, all right, don't hesitate. Someone's got to break the ice. Okay, so nesting bowls, I do love that analogy because it kind of shows you what they look like. I can't remember what my next slide is, but I want to tell you that I've shown you kind of the template for a flower. There are so many variations. I mentioned the idea of perfect, imperfect flowers, complete or incomplete flowers. This is a bisexual flower that we're looking at right now. There are flowers that are unisexual. So imagine that the gynoecium is gone and you've just got the androecium. So it's a male flower. Or you've got another flower where the gynoecium is present, but the androecium is not, right? So you've got a female flower. That can happen on the same plant, and then that plant is called a monoecious plant. So male and female flowers on the same plant in different places. Can anyone think of a good example of that? Anybody? Okay, I'll throw it out there. Oaks. Oaks are often a good example of this. So you've seen the male flowers hanging down in catkins, and then you've got the female flowers in the axils of the leaves, which is where you've got the acorns produced, right? So that's a good example. There's lots of others. So those flowers, the male and female flowers, were on the same plant, but you can also have another situation where the male and female flowers are on different plants. An example of that, that term for that is called dioecious, so separate male and female plants of a same species. Can anyone think of an example of that? One of the good ones I like to use is horseapple, Maclura pomifera, right? Horseapple, I can't think of any of the other names right now. Bodark tree, Osage orange, all those are names for Maclura pomifera, which has separate male and female plants. So you've seen these, they look like weird green brains hanging from the trees. Those are the fruit, therefore you know that is a female tree.
Joyce said cedar trees.
They're a little
maybe
different. Junipers are a little different. And thank you, Joyce, because you're putting me back. You're reminding me that I didn't preface some of this with the fact that we are talking about the angiosperms today. So we're talking about flowering plants and not gymnosperms, which are cedars, the genus Juniperus. So stay tuned and we'll talk about those maybe another time. I think that's a good idea. I should write that down. Maybe.
I think maybe salix. Would that be an example of male and female trees? Yeah.
I can think of the salix hanging. I don't actually know, Ashley. But I think there's there are lots of other ones out there and we can look at them. There's some well, there's others that we can look up that maybe we can talk about.
The toothache tree, one of them, the name is the prickly ash. The name is
Xanthoxylum.
Yeah, xanthozylum.
That one, it's funny because I don't know. I can envision the flowers and the developing fruit. I don't think so, but don't hold me to that. Okay, maybe that's everyone's
wanna-
homework for the next time we come.
I want to say that I just saw one and thought that was odd,
Okay, you
but
know
I
what?
wasn't sure. So that was one. It's one I'll look up.
That is actually a really good one. So let's go. Actually, I'm going to play on that. So are y'all looking at a screen now that has a bunch of text on it? Looks like an article.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So this document that I have up here is the Illustrated Flora of North Central Texas. And this this publication is available for free online. I don't have the link immediately handy, but I can post it afterwards, or we'll post it on the recording. But I'm going to, let's do Rutaceae. So, because how do you know? How can you look something up, and what website do you go to trust? This just happens to be one resource. Thank you. Actually, one resource in here. So let's go, and I think I have the right file open. Okay, so this book has the family Rutaceae, which is the citrus family. That species that Kimberly asked about, Xanthoxylum, happens to be in that family. There are keys. Notice that we have 4 genera in the North Central Texas area: Thamnosma, Xanthoxylum, Tilia, and Poncirus. And so there's a key to tell you which one's which. So I'm going to go down to Xanthoxylum. Here we go. Oh, this one's good. Okay, Kimberly, maybe you're right. You are right. So for the genus Xanthoxylum, it says, and let me zoom in because maybe you'll be able to read it with me. Ours are shrubs or small trees. They're dioecious or polygamous, so they may have both flowers that have male and female parts, and single-sex flowers. Let's see. Let's go down to the species you were looking at. So I'm scrolling down. You said tickle tongue, I think, didn't you? They're both called tickle tongue. Leaves without inflorescences. It just talks generally about the inflorescences in here. So I would say you're likely correct, Kimberly. But now you need to go look at some and show us as an example the next time.
Will do. I'll check it out.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. So back to this diagram. We've talked about the basic parts of the plant, right? So we've got our calyx, which are our sepals, protective purpose. We've got our corolla, which are our petals, which are our, hey, I'm here. This is my billboard. Come see me. Collectively, those are called the perianth, because sometimes they're also a little bit hard to tell one from the other. So if you're describing a flower, you can say it's the perianth, because you can't tell which ones are the sepals and petals, because some flowers have evolved so those two things look very similar. In Alstroemeria, which is a really good example to dissect, the sepals and the petals have evolved to look similarly to make for a bigger billboard, a bigger showy display for pollinators. So perianth. And then inside that, we've got the andrecium and then the gynoecium. Okay, are y'all ready to move to one of our examples? Okay, I know you might be sick of it already, even though it's making beautiful displays on the sides of the roads right now, and being quite dominant, but we're going to talk about Oenothera speciosa. So this is our pink evening primrose, and it is in the family Oenotheraceae, that has also our roadside garas, the genus fuchsia, and I'll show you a few examples at the end of these few slides. The inflorescence, remember, that is the grouping of flowers I was telling you about. That can help tell you what you're looking at, but it's not really what we're going to talk about today. But just for you to know that this plant that I brought in from outside that I keep holding up to my camera is Oenothera speciosa. Its flowers are grouped sort of in a terminal raceme. So that's a description for how the flowers are arranged. But they're more or less solitary in leaf axils, bracts in here. So the corolla, remember, that is the collective description for the petals. So that is, the corollas are pink, maybe whitish at their base, and you can't see that very well on my camera, but you can see it on that photograph next to us. The corolla sort of cup or dish shaped. And if you were able to count on that photograph that's on the left side of the screen, you would be able to see that there's 4 petals. You can't tell what the sepals look like because they're underneath the flower. Okay, so as we're all, I think many of us, I recognize everyone's names mostly, so we all know that we all use iNaturalist a lot. I use it a lot. It's helpful. One of the things you always want to do, sepals are diagnostic. So knowing what the sepals look like matters. So turn your flower upside down, take a picture of those sepals as well, because rarely do you get all the information you need just from the top part of the flower like this. Okay, the andrecium, you're going to have to take my word for it in this case, but you'll see some more photographs. There are 8 stamens. The gynoecium has 1 pistil and an inferior ovary. This is something we didn't really talk about yet, but I'm going to go, and I'm sorry, I have a typo. That should be 4-parted stigma there. Let's go back to our diagram really quickly. All right, y'all notice how this ovary is kind of sitting, the purple part is sitting on top of all the other whorls. That's known as a superior ovary. That's the placement of the ovary relative to the other parts. That ovary can actually be inferior, which means all the other parts are kind of connected above it. You can see this in a fruit because you can see this in a fruit when there's a scar from the stem, and on the opposite side of the fruit, you can still see scars or the remnants of those other parts of the flower. We can talk more about fruits another time. All right, let's talk through some of these things that I have bulleted on the next few slides. These diagrams are taken from a great website, Wayne's Word. This is a biologist who was teaching courses and developed these websites for his courses. They run the gamut. It's not just plants, but these are from that website, and I have the link again at the very end. But here's what we were looking at, right? So here's that evening primrose, and I'm going to talk us through it. So let's see, where's the best place to start? Okay, well, let's start with the biggest pink part on there. So those are the 4 petals. So we're looking at the perianth right here, the 4 petals that are bright pink that have those kind of darker pink veins. Beneath it, the outermost whorl, we have the sepals, right? So the calyx, and the calyx, there are 4 sepals in the calyx. And if any of you have worked with this plant before, you know that they're kind of strange. And when you're trying to count parts, it can be difficult because you're not going to be able to see this very clearly on my screen. But you can kind of see it on that picture. The sepals will sometimes remain partially fused, especially in this group. And so there are actually 4 of them, but the pairs are kind of partially fused. So let's see. Okay, so we've got the petals, the sepals. You can see the flower buds marked here. You can see the old corolla. Here's a new term that we haven't talked about. This is the hypanthium. So that is marked on the diagram on the left, but probably more clearly seen as the middle call out on the diagram on the right. It says hypanthium 2.5 centimeters. The hypanthium is kind of the name that you give for when some of those whorls are partially fused. And this fusion can matter, or does matter a lot in identifying it. We're not talking about fruits today, but if you think about another plant family that exhibit hypanthiums is the rose family, right? So and specifically, I'm thinking about apples. So apples, that hypanthium tissue of those fusion of parts is actually the part that you're biting into when you eat an apple. So hypanthium, it matters, and it can be diagnostic. And sometimes when you see kind of an extra thick, kind of waxy fusion of parts into like a cup-like shape that help protect the ovary, that's the hypanthium. If we're still looking at this Oenothera speciosa, and you keep following the plant down, you have got an ovary down at the base. I hope some of you do go have a look at this plant afterwards, or if you have already, if you feel down towards that base, it's actually got that ovary is kind of club shaped. It's a little thicker, further away from the stem than the base, and it's ridged. It's got 8 ridges. Let's see what I've got. Okay, another way to look at all the parts. So we were able to see the sepals, so that protective part that kind of fused together, that's marked on the right-hand side of the screen. We looked at the petals. 2 of them have been peeled off in this diagram, in this photograph on the right. And so we're able to see the reproductive parts. We're able to see the male and female, the andrecium and the gynoecium. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. Okay. On the left-hand side, that photograph, you can probably very difficultly count 8 anthers, 8 stamens. So those bright yellow kind of little club-shaped things are the anthers of this Oenothera speciosa. And you can kind of see that they're kind of grainy. So you've got pollen all over here. And there's something else I can't remember if I talk about, I have a screenshot for later, but those are the anthers. The anthers open up, distribute that pollen once they're mature. But this plant has kind of a cool adaptation where it also has something called viscin threads, V-I-S-C-I-N. And those threads kind of string together those pollen grains like a strand of pearls, so that when a pollinator comes and pollinates this plant, comes to get the nectar reward, it kind of drags all those pollen grains, kind of like a little string of pearls along with it, right? So all of these things to maximize reproduction and get their genes and pass them on to the next generation. Okay, so those were the anthers, and there are 8 of them here on the left. And on the right side diagram, where that flower is cut open, you can see those anthers pointed out again. Okay, inside, so the innermost whorl, the bullseye, we've got the gynoecium. The gynoecium, you can see here, you're looking at, we're not looking at the ovary yet, we'll look at that in the next slide, but you're looking at the style. So that's kind of the stalk that holds up the stigma. Up at the very top of that stalk, you see this branched, 4-branched stigma, right? So that is the sticky surface to which pollen will adhere, right? So the whole point is to get pollen from an anther to a stigma, so that that pollen can pollinate those ovules and make seeds and produce fruit. And then you've got the next generation. Okay, still with me? Okay. All right, now we're talking about the last part of the gynoecium, of that pistil, that carpal pistil. We're talking about the ovary here. So this diagram's also maybe a little bit better as well. And you can see that that it has been longitudinally sectioned. So you can see that, can you all see there that the sepals, the petals, even those stamens appear to kind of be fused into kind of a thicker section right there, which is kind of the white part, the hypanthium. At the base of the hypanthium, where you see the gynoecium, where you see the pistil popping up, you've got a nectar gland, right? So that's where the pollinators are, that's the reward the pollinators are coming in for. Underneath that, you can see the longitudinal section, and you can see all those little ovules attached to the placenta there. So that's the longitudinal section, which is the leftmost image that you're looking at. Pop over to the right. You're also looking at a longitudinal section on the right side of that image, but then right there in the middle, you can see it in cross section. So you can see how these ovules are attached in there. So those ovules, when fertilized, will produce seeds. The hypanthium will enlarge, well, actually the ovary will enlarge, and you'll get the fruit of that plant. The capsule, it's a capsule. Okay. Any thoughts or comments about the Oenograceae or Oenothera? Okay. So just going back, we had 4 sepals that were papery, kind of stuck together. We had 4 petals that were pinkish, whitish, yellow at their base with kind of pink veins. We had 8 anthers, 8 stamens. We counted the anthers, and then we had a stigma in the middle that was 4-branched. Okay. This was, so these are 2 websites actually that the pictures are not super high resolution on what I was able to get, but they're pretty helpful to find the parts. So I couldn't enlarge them any more than really what I have on here, but I encourage you to go look at Botany Brisbane, which is out of Australia. They have a lot of good labeled diagrams so you can start to learn the parts. Thank you, Ash. Oh, this is a good example. So the picture on the right side is actually from Texas A&M. They have a vascular plant image library, which is great. This happens to be a photograph taken by Hugh Wilson, who is now deceased, but was curator of that collection, the herbarium there. And can y'all see those, like I was talking about, those string of pearls, those vicin threads that hold together some of the pollen grains? Well, that's what you're looking at there. Okay. All right, I'm ready to switch to another group. That okay for everyone? Okay, so a plant that we're all pretty familiar with, and that we all, I think, know a lot about, the bluebonnets, right? So species Lupinus texensis. I am going to show you some images of other lupines. Yeah, just other lupines, because they were the better diagrammed images that I could find online. But Lupinus texensis, the inflorescence is a terminal raceme. We've talked about that term before. They're all these little flowers on stalks in a terminal at the end, at the tip of the plant. The corolla, right? So the corolla was the collective term for the petals, is sort of blue. In general, you know that there's the white spot, and on some of those lower ones, you see it kind of turn purplish or pink. It has got a very specific shape. The shape itself is named for this subfamily of the bean family. It is called papilionaceous, and in reference to like a papillon, like a butterfly. And this is because these petals are also all sorts of wonky and modified and fused in part. So there are 5 petals, but they're modified. Those 5 petals are a banner, which is the part at the top, and I think we'll see this in some of the subsequent slides. There are 2 wings, and then there are 2 petals that are fused into a keel. So many of these flowers that are very different looking have a very specific terminology applied to them. And you'll find that across all things, flowers or otherwise. The andrecium, there are 10 stamens, and they are of different lengths, but they're partially fused into a column. This is another reason why it's so hard to name the parts on a lot of the plants when you're out in the field. And the utility of some of these diagrams that I found online, and the people that have put the work into that labeling the diagrams, I mean, it's just so great, because sometimes, you have no idea what tissue you're looking at. And it's helpful to kind of have something to visually guide you. All right, the gynoecium, 1 pistil. It's got a superior ovary. We can talk a bit about that. It's got 1 chamber, 7 ovules, and the stigma is colorless. It's papillate. It has little nubs all over it, right? You can think about all these adaptations these plants have to their parts to make themselves more efficient and effective at being pollinated. Okay, so another 2 pictures here. So on the left-hand side, you have got the corolla identified, or the parts of the corolla, the parts of the petals, right, identified here. And this is an image from John Chester, 2010. That's his website. It's quite great. That is not Lupinus texensis, I don't think. Okay, so in this picture, if we're looking just, I'm not sure, let's see, where do we start? Yeah, let's go start on the left-hand picture, the actual photograph. So each one of those, you can see that there's a stalk holding up a single flower. If you're looking at that stalk, and I wonder if I can show you with my mouse, if you're looking at that stalk, you can see it's kind of hairy. It's covered in whitish hairs. The sepals, so, right, the calyx right here is also hairy. It's kind of diminutive. It's kind of a grayish, maybe pinkish, reddish color, purplish color at the back here. So that's the sepals. That's the calyx. Then everything inside that we can see visibly are the petals, are the corolla. So remember I said it has 5 petals, but there's some fusion going on. The thing that's easiest to see is the banner. And you can identify the banner because it's on top of the flower. It's upward facing. And in this case, identified here, you can see it's got a white spot. So you can call that the banner spot. So that's your banner. So that's one petal. Then I'm looking at the leftmost corner, bottom left corner of this photograph. Then you've got the two wings. So they're just like this, two wings. So you've got your banner, and then you've got your two wings, right? So that's 3. Then what is very difficult to see, except maybe in the uppermost center of that photograph, is the keel. So you have basically 2 petals that are fused together to form this kind of rigid, like the keel of a boat. So I believe that must be where it gets its name. So that keel of the boat, and you can see that that keel is whitish, but it's kind of dark and clawed at the tip, right? Okay, so if we're looking over at the diagram on the right, this is from Wikipedia. It's just been sectioned longitudinally, more or less, so you can see the parts. The pedicel, we haven't talked about that, but that's basically the little stalk that holds up the flower. You've got the calyx, right? So those were the sepals. That was the furry thing that you could see on the photograph on the other side of the page. You've got the petals there. And what's been done, you can basically see, you can basically see up at the top is the banner. By the way, it's also called a standard. And then, oh, Sue, I'm glad you mentioned that because your slide's coming up. So Sue is talking about the UV on the bluebonnets, and I did put your picture in here, Sue. So I'm hoping maybe you might be willing to talk about it in a minute. Okay, and then in there we've got the and this is again not an example of the lupine or the bluebonnet that we're talking about, but it's a good example of the flower type. And then inside the keel, you've got the reproductive parts. You've got the stamens and you've got the pistil. So that's kind of what it looks like there. Let's see if some of the subsequent images might help you a bit more. Okay, perfect. All right, on the left-hand side, so these are pictures from a blog I found called the Zoological Curiosity blog. They're a little bit blurry, but they're great. They're great to be able to see. So the left-hand side shows you a flower. We're looking at the banner. You're looking at kind of, the wings are kind of inflated and still kind of protecting the keel and the anthers and the stigma in there. On the right, you can see that keel. So the central image, you can see that keel is kind of peeking out. You still can't readily see the reproductive parts, right? So, all right, let's see what the next slide shows us. Okay, I'm going to stick on this one for a second. If you go online and look at bluebonnet pollination, and I'm sorry I didn't include this image in here, but you can see based on how that pollinator approaches that flower, it basically pushes down that keel, which automatically pushes those stamens and that stigma kind of out. So as a bee comes in, it kind of picks up it picks up the pollen grains and then deposits them on the next flower. Yeah, we'll see how that works. Okay, Sue, do you want to have a look at, you want to tell us about any of this? Okay, I'm not sure, I can't hear you, Sue, but so Sue Frary, who's on the chat right now. Oh,
Can
good.
you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Sue.
Okay. Sorry about my voice. I thought that the banner spot would not be dark on the older,
Yeah.
the white ones. And there's a red one down at the bottom, a newer one, but they're all dark. So that would attract the bees to all of the flowers.
I was interested looking at that too, Sue. So I think most of you, and many of you probably know more about this than I do, but I will tell you, you notice if you're looking at an inflorescence, so this group of flowers, where are the oldest flowers? Are they at the top or the bottom? So which flowers came out first? The ones at the top or the ones at the bottom? Can you tell? And you can put your answer in the chat if you want to, or I'll tell you what I think in a minute. Okay, so if we're looking at this inflorescence, I can see that at the tip, at the distal or furthest most end, I have got what look like little buds, right? Immature flowers. And I can see that they're slowly opening up more and more and more as they go down to the base of the flower. I also notice that the banner spot, or the spot on the standard, is whitish on that top petal, on that standard, on that banner, on the flowers that are uppermost, and then it turns reddish at the bottommost flowers. So, you know, the idea, what I read was that that color change happens to indicate the viability of that flower for pollination. It could mean that flower is too old, cannot be pollinated, hence it goes that dark color. Or it could mean, excuse me, or it could mean that it has already been pollinated. So, you know, do not attract pollinators here. So, so I don't know. I think it's worth understanding a little better, doing a little more reading here. Does anyone have any? Yeah, go ahead, Sue.
Just one comment. Bees don't see red very well, if at all. So that would make sense in the visible. But if you see over on the ultraviolet, it's still very dark. So
Yeah.
I don't know what a bee sees. I'd have to ask one.
All right, that's the subject of the next talk. Who's willing to present? What does a bee see? I didn't get a chance. So I think also the Oenothera, Sue also captured this in UV. So there's a website down here, and I realize I did not repeat this one in the resources at the end. And this is especially important because many of you armchair botanists have helped us transcribe these. But if you go to the portal.torqueherbaria.org website, you can search all collections, and you can do a search, and you can plug in Frary for Sue's last name and put in Texas and then hit enter, and it will return all the collections Sue has made. And she has been pairing her UV images of these plants there. So it's a great resource to find this. Thank you, Megan. Megan commented in here that I think bees can also see infrared light. So maybe a little bit more for us to talk about, or invite somebody to come speak. Maybe you, Megan, to talk to us about this. All right. This is just a summary slide about the beans, just talking about how it is one of the largest families in the world. There are many members, and it is so large that it's actually divided into 3 subfamilies that have very different floral characteristics. So I'm going to leave you with that last comment, that the differences in these, in the Fabaceae family. Think about your mimosas and those puffballs, your cat's claw, your Schrankia. They all have, those are flowers. What are the parts? Maybe that's some good homework, and do it next time. Okay, I have 11 minutes, and there are 2 more groups I wanted to go through. So, but I thought this was rather interesting. So hopefully you're looking at my screen right now and you're seeing the paintbrushes on here, Castilleja. So these 2 photographs were taken by Aiden Campos, and they're online in iNaturalist. If you go to iNaturalist website, those are the observation numbers in there of 2 species that we have commonly in this area. So on the left side, we have Indivisa, and on the right side, we have Castilleja purpurea. And this is kind of fun because if you look at this, you talk about the inflorescence, and you see all this color, you think, oh, those are all petals or parts of the corolla, because the sepals are usually protective and the corollas, the billboard. But they're really interesting flowers when you get down to it. So so this is a terminal spike. That's the name for the inflorescence. The corolla is actually inconspicuous. It's tubular, kind of 2-lipped. I'll show you what it looks like in a minute. The calyx has color often at the tips. The floral bract is also, so this is actually not even typically part of a flower, but sometimes you find vegetative tissue that subtends, that's below a flower. We call those bracts. They can be very showy in different groups of plants. Some big ones that come to mind are poinsettias and this group here. So the Orobanchaceae, the Castillejas. There are 4 stamens in these flowers, and they're didynomous. So that means that there are, in pairs, there are 2 long anthers and 2 short anthers. And I say all of this not to confuse you or overwhelm you, but just because all these minute differences are diagnostic. They help us know. Okay, these all came from a wonderful website that I hadn't encountered before, which is Collins Virtual Herbarium. I don't know anything about the author, but this website is free and available. It's online, and it covers many different families. And it was and when I was perusing, it had some of the best pictures of these plants. So on the left-hand side, and this is, and I believe Colin is out of Alberta, somewhere in Canada. So these are a different species of Castilleja, but I think it translates. So on the left-hand side, you have the inflorescence, the group of flowers, the terminal inflorescence. On the right side, you have a single flower, right? So here, the new part to be introduced is the bract, which I just talked about. So on the red text, it says on the leftmost, on the right image, it says bract. And you can see that that bract is kind of dissected, kind of like a finger, like a mitten. That's actually, that bract character is one of the characters used to differentiate some of our own native species. So that matters. The bract is important. But you see it's also colored, so it increases the like showiness of this flower. Then you'll notice there's the calyx that's also there. The calyx almost seems one-sided, kind of tubular, ridged. It's kind of dissected at the tip. And then you've got your corolla inside that. And we'll go through each of those parts. Okay, again, that same image, but actually from the other side of the flower, you've got the bract, which is subtending the whole flower. You've got the calyx. Inside, you've got the corolla. And that little black thing you see there is a stigma sticking out. On the right, that image, that's the bract. The bract has been pulled out for us to look at. Okay, the bract is gone. Now we are just dealing with the flower, the four whorls that we talked about. We've been talking about since the beginning. We've got your calyx, right? Again, your sepals, but you notice they're kind of fused in this case to kind of make this big old tube. And you can see what we often will call those are the lobes at the end. You might call them lobes when you've got something fused. Terminology that was relatively new to me were the terms galea for the petals, for the corolla, which have to do with the kind of form it takes. I don't see this consistently applied. So Google it, take it for what you will, and win at Scrabble if you want to take the term galea off. And then you've got your stigma and then the style, which holds up that stigma, right? Your female part. Okay, cool. Here we go. So now we have removed, let's see, let me confirm. Okay, I'm going to go back one more time. All right, that calyx, see that hairy calyx? What's cool is you can actually see that there are glandular hairs on this calyx. See all those little hairs sticking out that have a little ball on the end? Glandular hairs. This next image, we're removing the calyx. All right, so now we're left with the three innermost whorls, the corolla, the andrecium, and the gynoecium. You can't see the andrecium right now. Here's the corolla tube, right? So all those petals are kind of fused into a tube. You're looking at one side, and it's, it is not radially symmetrical, right? So you can only split it. It's bilaterally symmetrical. You can only split it and be symmetrical across one plane. Top image, you're looking at one side of the flower, of the corolla, of the petals. And then on the bottom, larger image, you're looking at the other side of the corolla or those petals. So this, you often see this in the mint family where you've got a two-lipped flower, kind of what you see at the top and the bottom, and there's kind of, In here, those three little green things, the teeth of the lower lip of the petals of the corolla. So it's kind of modified in that way. So some of this, you're taking on faith that weirdly modified thing really is a petal. And there's work that has gone into determining what these are, including observations of these. And and what I like about these photographs that I'm presenting is that they interpret those technical descriptions and the research that has been done into a visual form so you can see, oh, that's what that is. That's what they're talking about. And then, so if I'm describing the corolla here, it's mostly greenish, but that upper lip, those petals that are kind of curled around and protecting the male and female parts, what's labeled here is the upper lip or the galea. It's kind of pinkish right there. All right, and again, you can still see the little black curled stigma at the end. Here's another picture of the same flower, that same corolla tube, which is mostly whitish at the base, then it comes greenish on one side, turning to pink. You've got those three little teeth of the lower lip. Okay, here, Colin has removed the corolla. So now we can see the other parts. So you can see that there are 4 stamens, right? So we're looking at the filament and then the anthers, which are kind of shriveled and blackish on here. And then in the middle of that whorl, in the middle of the andrecium, you've got the gynoecium. So you've got the style and you've got the stigma at the end. Okay. Hopefully you're looking at paintbrushes a little bit differently. So we're not talking about their life, how they live and survive, but they are hemiparasites. So they do actually obtain carbohydrates, nutrients they need from other plants, almost in a parasitic way, but they can also produce their own energy through chlorophyll. They do have green leaves as well, right? So I would have a look up the genus Castilleja, Castilleja, and look up hemiparasite, and you'll find a lot more information that's really interesting about this group. Any questions about this one? Okay, so I'm going to leave you with something to just blow your mind. So we talked about flowers. This family is also with the Fabaceae, one of the largest families, 2 families in the world, the Asteraceae, the sunflowers. The inflorescence on a sunflower family member is a head. It's called a capitulum. And it is a densely packed with many, many flowers. So when you're looking at a common sunflower, you're looking at hundreds of flowers of 2 types. There are ray flowers, which have those strap petal looking things on the outside, and disc flowers on the inside. And that is all I'm going to say, because that's all I'm going to have time for. I'll show you these 2 images also taken from Colin's virtual herbarium, sectioning an inflorescence of the sunflower family and showing you, and it's probably best seen on the image of the right, there are flowers on the inside that are kind of diminutive and aren't really showy, but then you have flowers on the outside that have those big old ligules or strap petal yellow looking things. All right, and I'm going to end with the resources that are super useful. I've kind of abbreviated some of them and taken you to a higher level parent directory so you can see what those links are. But I'm sorry, I meant this to be sooner, but I hadn't practiced. I hope it was helpful. Anyone have any questions for me? You're welcome to unmute if that's easier.
Thank you, Tiana. Everyone should be able to unmute themselves now, I think. I realized I didn't have that setting changed. But this was so helpful, Tiana. I feel like, all of the terminology is a little intimidating, but this just makes me want to I feel like just practicing, looking at different species, trying to find each of the parts, because they all are so different. Not all of them are going to be the same. Not all the parts are going to look the same. So, and I really am glad that you found these cool resources. So I think I tried to put most of them in the chat, but I think maybe we can put some, that last page you had, maybe we can put that somewhere on our website too.
Actually, I was thinking the same thing. It might be a good exercise so if any of y'all do come across some of these resources that you find useful labeling parts, send them our way to herbarium@brit.org, to that website, and we'll post them maybe on a blog somewhere, because I think this is helpful to learn. I know I learned a lot doing this.
And yeah, definitely. And this helps with looking at dichotomous keys and kind of IDing stuff even. We're just at 1 o'clock. I mean, you must have done a good job, T, because there's no questions. And I know it's a lot to absorb too. So I will email everyone whenever we get this presentation put on YouTube, hopefully within the next week or so, in case you want to go back and look at some of the examples that Tiana had. Yes, Valerie, this is being recorded, so we'll definitely post this on YouTube within the next week so you can see the beginning parts.
Well, take care and send us pictures if you like, and we'll highlight them in future Armchair Botany sessions and label them. And then we can all learn.
Thank you, T, and thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.